Welcome to the Practice Podcast, a show created by lawyers to help lawyers in life and business without all the complicated lawyer language. Let's welcome Bast Amron founders and your hosts, Jeff Bast and Brett Amron.
Hey, Jeff.
Hi, Brett.
How are you?
I'm wonderful. How are you?
Wow, wonderful.
Yeah, I'm excited. We have a good guest today. I'm excited. I'm also excited to see you. Always gets me excited. Let's roll. That's a topic for another recording.
Let's roll into it.
Yeah. All right. Nelson's cueing me that I'm too soft. I'm too quiet today.
Yeah, don't go. Not too soft.
I don't get told that often, but anyway. Hi, Scott. We have a special guest today, Scott Schonfeld. Scott is a partner in the corporate and securities and real estate groups of Fox Swibel, which is a boutique business law firm in Chicago. He maintains a very broad-based transactional practice. He handles mergers and acquisitions, securities matters, general corporate, and commercial real estate. But his real focus, and that's likely going to touch on this today, is his expertise in representing restaurants and in particular celebrity chefs. He frequently partners with restaurateurs, restaurant owners, developers, chefs, and virtually every other type of stakeholder in the restaurant industry. And he collaborates with some of the largest and most successful restaurant companies in the nation, and he's negotiated, documented, closed many transactions in this space. He also works with Northwestern University's startup accelerator known as The Garage, which is a cool name. And he represents emerging companies in every aspect of the startup life cycle. So we're excited to have him. Welcome, Scott.
Thank you so much, guys. It's truly a pleasure to be here in sunny South Florida. I did grow up here. Right? I absolutely am from here. I went to high school in Pinecrest and Fort Lauderdale, and I was a summer associate 1,000 years ago at Stearns Weaver here in Miami. But it is
I think, were you a summer associate with someone we know?
100%. That's how I know her. That's how I know her.
Haley Harrison?
It's certainly been a long time coming, and I spend winters here in South Florida, but tremendously delighted to be here today.
All right. Well, we are recording this in late October. I don't know if I'd call it winter.
No, I would not call it winter. I wouldn't even, maybe not even fall, but I guess it's not summer.
It's not summer. Good point. I think the weather's beautiful out. So how did you end up in Chicago from growing up in South Florida?
Yeah, so I went to college for 2 years at Dartmouth College in Hanover, New Hampshire, and then spent the other 2 years at Stanford and graduated from Stanford, not really knowing which law school or sort of, region I was going to end up in, but had the sort of great, I guess, chance or fortune to get accepted from the University of Chicago Law School in Chicago.
Nice. Great school.
Went there, stayed for a girl. She and I broke up, but kept the city. And it's truly a great place to live and to practice law.
Yeah, Chicago's a great city. Really cool. And I always, to me, it sort of has to be, given how cold it is, right? I mean, I would think it's got to be a cool place to live. Yeah.
I always say it's like a clean New York, a little smaller, but much cleaner. And it's Midwestern, so people are still friendly there.
It's super Midwest. It's super nice. The practice of law is much more manageable than New York. And truly, the attorneys there are really top-notch and really easy to work with.
Right. And you've been with Fox Swibel for
about 6.5 years now.
Okay.
Just made partner in the last year.
Congratulations.
Thank you both very much.
Although making partner is like one of those, it's like you won the pie eating competition. The prize is more pie.
100%.
So it's one of those things that I think all young lawyers strive for, and they're not really sure why. but we know we want it. We all get it. So congratulations on getting it. So I mentioned in your introduction your restaurant practice. Before we dig into it, how did you find your way to corporate transactional?
Yeah.
Or did you? Well, actually, before we even go there, did you know you wanted to go to? You always knew you wanted to go to law school?
So I'm actually the son of a former litigator from down here. Her name is Felice Schonfeld. She retired a few years ago. She was at Duane Morris, and I'm probably more similar to her than I would care to share. And I think as a young person growing up, I just kind of knew that I had that thing. I definitely had the interest and the talent to become an attorney. And after graduating from college with a sociology major and a minor in engineering, I decided that probably the best application of my talents and interests was going to law school. So I've known for quite some time that I would be an attorney. I didn't actually know that I was going to be a corporate attorney or a transactional attorney. So actually, that is really, truly happenstance. During the first year of law school, I was taking Civ Pro. I was taking all of these super case-based, litigation-oriented classes, and I really hated it. I thought this is just it's terribly uninteresting. It's very much bogged down in nuance and discovery and all of these mini battles that go on behind the scenes that I thought were terribly uninteresting. Right. And I called my mom during my 1L at Chicago and I said, this is just horrible. I think I'm going to drop out. And she said, you should really hang in there because if you do, you can take corporate classes, tax classes, and perhaps your sort of more mathy, businessy kind of mind is going to gravitate towards that. And I'm truly fortunate that I did because I was able to see that transactional is just like super interesting, super creative, and have since been doing that.
So you're now on record, by the way, for thanking mom. So
thanking mom.
Thank you. If you want to thank her more, formally, go for it.
So for me, I actually went the opposite. I was a finance major in college. I thought I wanted to be a corporate transactional lawyer, actually in-house. I was like, I'm going to go and work for a company, be an in-house counsel. And then I got my first job as a clerk with a litigator in Miami. Yeah. And I said, no, I think I want to do that. And then I started taking all these classes and litigation skills and all that. And then I now look at transactional lawyers and think the same thing you do about litigators. And that's why there's litigators and that's why there's transactional lawyers, right?
100%. 100%.
Yeah. It's funny though, like the polar opposite.
Wow.
Yeah.
Well, truly, I do think that when you have a really good dogfight that's really nuanced and kind of has some wrinkles, a really good piece of a trial or a really good matter that you guys handle is often much more interesting than the absolute most interesting case that I handle. But I will say that you guys drag those on for years and years and years, whereas an M&A or a real estate deal is opened and closed in 2 to 3 months.
Right. Well, I mean, it is, I would say generally a transaction is more collaborative, right? You're 100%. You're on one side, they're on the other side. You're both trying to achieve the same objective. You want to get the deal done.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
And so ours is a little bit more combative. I think bankruptcy kind of falls in the middle. We're sort of a hybrid of the two. We have litigation components, but we're also ultimately, especially if it's a restructuring, we're trying to achieve an objective, and that is the emergence of this company in an operating fashion.
Well, I think that even in litigation, right? I mean, you're trying to achieve something, right? And hopefully you can get the other side to agree in terms of what that is, not necessarily where it's going to end up.
Sure.
Right? That if both sides can get in the room, and this is where good high-level litigators come into play, just like good M&A lawyers, let's get in a room and figure out, okay, where does my client want to be? Where does your client want to be? How do we try to get somewhere in between that?
Totally.
Right. Yeah.
But we get dragged along a lot of times into litigation for years. And all right, well, that's what we have to do because the other side, that's what they want to do. Or sometimes our client, that's kind of where they want to go, right?
Sure.
It's the same thing in M&A. I mean, it's more. It could be more short term, like you said, than litigation. And hopefully everyone's working this, in the same direction and collaboratively. But sometimes deals fall apart.
100%.
Yeah.
And I'm sure some deals fall apart from fatigue. Litigation sometimes does too. It doesn't fall apart, but people finally give up after they've been paying bills and fighting and been distracted. But it's something we say that, to comment on Brett's comment, which is we always say that our client winning doesn't necessarily mean that the other side loses. I mean, sometimes it's finding that middle ground where our client can win and the other side can not lose.
Yeah, I mean, I think early in my career, I want to win now, a little older, a lot more gray. And it's, what's a win?
Yeah.
And a loss? It's more gray. It's more nuanced,
right?
Because it could be a win for a party. We're mostly on the plaintiff side, but it could be a win for a party on the defense side to settle and pay some money as opposed to spending more money on litigation fees and and spending more money on a judgment or on a settlement. So
For sure. But to be fair, in a corporate deal or a real estate deal, you can have a buyer and a seller walk away both feeling as though they absolutely crushed it.
sure.
And I feel like in
When
the
they don't
nature...
close, you mean when they
No,
with
I
the
mean,
deal closing?
if a deal closes, both sides can walk away feeling as though they absolutely crushed it.
Right. But they should, right? That's a good deal.
And they absolutely should. But definitely in litigation, it's probably more likely than not that some side probably more substantially prevailed than some other side did.
I'd say perhaps if you get to judgment or there's significant negative rulings, right, that gut your defense or gut your plaintiff's case. But if you reach a settlement, there could be a time when both sides walk away going, yeah, crushed it. They could have gotten more, or man, we were willing to take less. Or
I guess that's
fair.
I guess
More
that's
often
fair, yeah.
both sides are unhappy.
Or both sides are unhappy. And that means that it's a good settlement in all likelihood, right? Like both sides are thinking, man, I left money on the table, or I paid too much.
For sure.
And you're holding your nose and you're willing to take it.
For sure.
Yes. And so there's some similarities with M&A, although I think you're right that most of the time people walk away from litigation thinking, boy, I don't want to do that again.
Right.
As opposed to an M&A deal like, yeah, we're going to do that again. We're going to buy something or we're going to sell something again.
Sure.
But I think, your perspective, Brett, is why, one of many reasons why you're an excellent litigator, because you're thinking about the end, right? That's really what both sides should be thinking about. What's the end here? Like, nobody wants to be involved in litigation.
Right.
I mean, just as a long-term idea, concept, ultimately what both sides want is an end. So what's the end and where, how far apart are they and how do you bring them together?
To me, I find it so impressive squaring off with counsel across from the table who truly can say no or who can say maybe, but who offer a range of alternatives.
Right.
And people who can really articulate a series of alternatives and present them and offer them kind of interchangeably. That to me is a truly impressive lawyer who is able to solve problems.
Right.
As opposed to attorneys
That's your job.
who simply say no and tell you, that it's their practice to say no on the issue or their client can't possibly say yes, blah, 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 blah. That is a not persuasive attorney in my mind.
Right.
Yeah. So as Jeff said, right, sitting in a room, again, when you have a deal, right, the goal is the end game and the goal is to close that deal.
Sure.
Right. And the terms are going to kind of go back and forth and you're going to get there and paper it. Even on a restructuring, it's the same thing. If you go into a bankruptcy, right, well, what do we always say? Before you file a bankruptcy, you know what the exit's going to be.
Always have a plan to get out.
Always have a plan to get out. That's the end. And the same thing in litigation, which is, okay, how does this end? And unfortunately, in all of those areas, you come across lawyers on the other side that either can't acknowledge that, won't acknowledge that.
But also, amazingly enough, it does seem as though some clients want that. Some clients think that good lawyering is just simply being impossible and simply being a jerk and simply sort of like rattling a saber and showing how nasty you are. And there is an element, there is some sort of a productive value in sometimes being a jerk. But more often than not, I find the absolute finest lawyers that I encounter are the ones who are very even-keeled, very persuasive, very sharp, and are able to articulate a range of alternatives and get to a place that I think both parties kind of want to go.
Right.
Yeah. You got to figure out how to get there, right? Be a lawyer. And listen, there are times where you need to be aggressive. There's times you need to push. There's times when you need to sometimes even get animated. Sometimes there is a place for that.
Sure.
But never losing sight of or having that communication with your client of where are we going? Where are we going?
100%.
And it may not be a straight line. It may
100%.
not be. But never losing sight of that ultimate goal. So
good stuff. And we also have an episode, I think it's called Bulldogs Are Not Better Lawyers or something like that. But that's
got Bulldog
generally, I'm sure you've listened to all the episodes of the podcast.
Every single one of them.
You probably remember that one.
Yes. We swore him in beforehand. So if he didn't,
confirm.
then
it's part of the process of getting on the show.
Yeah,
exactly.
That's right.
So let's talk about your restaurant practice. How did you get involved in?
So I started the first 3 years of my career practicing, just doing pure dirt work. And I was doing pure real estate deals at a very high level, doing industrial acquisitions and doing portfolio acquisitions and doing dispositions and financings. And 3 years in, I just decided that being a 100% dedicated real estate lawyer was not my thing. And I was searching for a job and I came across Fox Swibel. And Fox Swibel is this boutique firm in Chicago that has some really top-notch lawyers who came from very big firms, but who wanted to have a more entrepreneurial career and have a rate structure that ultimately is palatable to clients who are both big and small and sophisticated and solos. And so I was offered the opportunity to be retrained as a corporate lawyer. And growing up as a corporate lawyer, I was, kind of getting involved pretty early on with my mentor and boss, Larry Swibel, whose name is on the wall. And Larry is sort of the dean of the restaurant bar in Chicago. He represents some of the major restaurant groups and celebrity chefs across the country and also in Miami. And I became his right-hand guy and got some really great experience doing everything from the lease to the joint venture to the equity offering among friends and family, sometimes exits, sometimes purchases, sometimes IP matters, but becoming the trusted sort of outside transactional counsel that these restaurant groups and chefs need doing their deals, growing their business. And after doing that for quite some time, I was able to develop my own roster of clients and also become his sort of trusted guy with our existing clients. And now I would say that I'm practicing at the absolute same caliber as anybody in the city, as anybody across the country in this space.
Wow. That's pretty impressive. And you mentioned the transition from real estate to transactional. It's not, real estate is a transactional practice.
Sure.
It's just a little bit more of a niche.
It's very similar. Growing up and marking up real estate purchase agreements, the concepts that you see in M&A deals and real estate deals are very similar. You have reps and warranties, you have covenants, you have survivals. However, the primary difference in being a real estate lawyer versus a corporate lawyer is the range of issues that you see in diligence. In real estate, you see easements, you see encroachments, you see certain zoning issues.
Right.
Sometimes there are, permitting issues. But the universe of possibilities that you're going to see for a real estate deal is kind of narrow.
Right.
In a corporate deal, you can see employment issues, you can see ERISA issues, you can see tax issues, you can see
real estate issues.
100%. And so, as a corporate lawyer, I think it truly is more challenging only because the universe of things that ultimately can kill a deal are so much greater. And you have to have a wider knowledge base to sort of know as a corporate lawyer that you have an issue, you can't resolve it yourself. You have to pull in counsel, but ultimately having sort of, I would say, ankle-deep knowledge on a very wide range of issues.
Ankle-deep knowledge?
Yeah. So, as opposed to like being knee-deep in every kind of a real estate issue and being able to solve that issue. Ankle-deep saying, gosh.
So it's almost as if, and maybe it is, you're sort of acting as their general counsel almost with respect to all of these issues, meaning there's some things you can dive into and handle, and there's sometimes you need some expertise.
100%.
Okay.
100%.
Right.
Yeah. So you're the quarterback basically for the client. And I imagine on a major M&A deal, you're assembling a team of people and likely from within Fox Swibel, but maybe not.
Yeah, 100%. I certainly think the quarterback analogy is kind of overused, but is probably a fairly illustrative characterization of how corporate attorneys work on M&A deals.
Right. I use it in restructuring. You're kind of the quarterback, and there might be real estate people, there's M&A people, there are litigators. It's kind of a panoply of lawyers. And so in this Fox Swibel, is it full service?
Full service, has every practice that you pretty much have to draw upon. A few exceptions, healthcare, ERISA, but by and large, we absolutely have the capability to handle a pretty major M&A.
So what are you seeing today as some of the key issues that your clients, restaurateurs, are having?
Yeah. So I think from my vantage point, the issues that our clients are seeing in the restaurant front, right now it's consumer pullback. As the economy weakens, consumers are quick to give up their discretionary spend at restaurants, point one. Point two is, to your point before the show, Brad, it's absolutely the continued inability to get staff. Amazon and all of these major retailers picked up a huge number of restaurant workers during the downturn. And that hasn't returned to normal levels. So I'm constantly having issues getting a hold of my clients because they are running around doing so many different odd jobs for these restaurants. Beyond that, debt and the overall debt markets is tough right now. I mean, as interest rates go up, demand for debt goes down, becomes pricier to finance certain things. Yeah, I would say that those three issues.
And I would imagine that, I know there's consumer pullback, and within that, right, the cost of all the materials and goods and human resources can't be passed on 100%, right, to the clients. To the customer, I would say.
And it's funny because we certainly have seen that in Chicago. And I'm sure that, I'm sure it's the same down here in South Florida. Certain of our clients had a 2% or a 3% service charge passed on to clients, or customers rather. And overwhelmingly, I think that customers were accepting of it, but there were a vocal enough minority who weren't accepting of it, who made it a problem. Mm-hmm. And so, restaurants haven't been as successful in passing through costs as, say, attorneys have.
Yeah. I mean, it's a tough business. I always say restaurants, I can't really think, maybe law firm. I can't think of another business where you have to get everything right. The price has to be right, the service, the temperature, the climate, the timing, the taste. There's zero margin for error, the lighting.
100%.
It's like,
and if a customer has a bad experience,
that's it.
It could
almost
right?
never.
I will
never
say,
you get a
guys,
second chance, right? If you have a bad experience at a restaurant, you're probably not going to go back there.
Yeah,
it's a tough business.
How do you guys feel about the overall service down here in South Florida?
I think I'm a believer. I'm proud of. I'm a
every winter.
I'm a cheerleader.
Jeff is a homer.
I'm a cheerleader.
That's what you would call a homer.
Every winter I come down here and I dine at your best restaurants in like Wynwood or Brickell or wherever, and I'm truly amazed at the lack of service down here.
The good restaurants are the ones who last, who survive a long time, and those that survive are the ones that get it right. So,
well, I'm going to throw a little bit of cold water.
I'm always open for it.
No, I think there's some truth to what you just said, right? Which is there are some really high-end, not even high-end, good restaurants. They don't even have to be high-end, that probably get it right. And maybe that's due to their hiring process. Maybe that's due to what they pay people, how they treat people, all of that. But there are, by and large, a huge percentage of the businesses down here. The service is terrible. And I think that we become accustomed to it.
100%.
And we just eat it. We literally eat it, right? I mean, we just take it. And there's times I stopped for a while. My wife and I, we would go to a restaurant after the pandemic and things started opening up. And the service was so bad that we said, okay, why are we going to go out?
Right.
We might as well take, if we're going to eat out, let's take in and eat it at home.
But I'm curious to know why it is down here. It does seem as though the service is just so much worse.
Well,
we can talk
than
offline.
Say Chicago, for example.
Yeah. I mean, I think, first of all, I recognize that since the pandemic, service has declined because there have been staffing issues. In my experience, most of the restaurants, they start strong and they can't finish. So like the service is good in the beginning. They'll take your order. You're going to get good service. And then your dish is just going to sit there when you're done, and they can't close you out and turn you over.
I've never heard that philosophy.
They're lacking the staff to, the finish. It's that last mile.
Yeah.
I don't think that is unique to the restaurant industry down here, to be honest with you. And I know there are people that have moved down here recently. I mean, I didn't grow up here. My wife didn't grow up here. We've been living here long enough that we've become, it's Miami, accustomed to it.
Right.
But even tradesmen, right? Like to find good people that are reliable to come to you out, it's hard to do that. We have a roster now. We've been here long enough that we call upon people, but we're seeing people that just recently moved, transplants, that are like
amazed.
They're amazed. And they're like, where do you find, I need a plumber. Where can you find
we have the ocean. You can't have everything.
Truly, it's kind of like the flip side of the positive of like Miami chill is this sort of negative, which is, well, they're pretty chill about doing the work sometimes too.
Yeah. I
we
think,
have a transient workforce, right? So like a lot of people here, they're here temporarily. They're enjoying the scene. They don't really want to work. And so I think it's hard for any employer to keep good people long term. And I think it's gotten harder since the pandemic.
Sure.
And that being said, I do think that there should be, first of all, there's a huge opening for anybody who's moving down, if they want to move down, to follow their customer base or client base to try to get the service right, no matter what your industry is. And I think there's some of that, right? Like some of the restaurants that are opening and some of the restaurateurs that are coming down here, I think maybe they're trying.
I'm opening up ABBA in Bell Harbor in 2 nights.
Okay.
So you guys can come and get a table at ABBA. I'm happy to hook you up.
All right.
And you can evaluate for yourself Chicago hospitality.
Well, there you go, right? And so, but I think that I'm hoping that there will be a switch at some point that the customer base will demand it.
Maybe.
And so people will have to do it, right?
Maybe. Yeah. That's been my experience. If you want to survive, you got to get it right. And I think traditionally South Florida has been a seasonal economy.
Very.
So conventional wisdom is if they can make it through the summer on locals, then they can survive the winter when they have the snowbirds. And so that's why I always thought that's to me the best time to eat out in South Florida is the summertime when the restaurants aren't jammed and you can get a table.
Yeah.
But now we've had such an influx here that we don't really have a season. It's just full all year round. Everything is full all year round. So I think but that process used to be a good weed out.
Interesting.
Because if you weren't good, people weren't going to eat. The locals aren't going to eat there,
So ready for you, Jeff. On a random Thursday night, if you're going to a restaurant that you normally would go to, would you call and think, I need a reservation?
Right. No.
Not, right? In the past, you would never have to do that.
But now you do.
I went with a buddy of mine. We met up. We went to a restaurant and I walk up and I say, hey, table for 2. And they looked at me and they said, do you have a reservation? And I said, no, it's Thursday night.
Right.
I didn't need, thankfully there was a table, but that totally changed sort of our mindset that now you got to make a reservation.
Yeah.
Lunches, dinners, like it doesn't matter anymore. So I think that's the influx.
It's a sign of success. I mean,
I think so. And I think that
people have moved here.
I think Miami has definitely become more sophisticated as a city. It is not as entrenched as older, more established cities, Chicago, New York, Boston, like all those cities.
Sure.
And you have generations who grew up there and lived there and stayed there. And so I think that is why you have the pride aspect almost, and I think it's missing here because you don't have the generations and you have transient people and people who come for a brief period and leave. And then you have people like Jeff who are generational, right? His father and him and his family and now his kids. So I think there's more of that and there's more of that may lend itself to maybe a maturation of that.
Maybe.
You have any good restaurant stories that you could share representing restaurants? I mean, what's it like working with chefs as businessmen?
Yeah, and you don't have to name names.
No, without naming names,
Right.
I would imagine some chefs suffer from, they're excellent in the kitchen, but probably not very good at the conference room.
So, it's interesting. So I have this super expansive corporate practice and real estate practice. And for our M&A deals, it's really ultra arm's length, ultra sophisticated. We have term sheets. They're super negotiated. Everybody kind of knows the game. In restaurant deals, it's totally wide open. And often, it's a restaurateur and some sort of owner of a property truly figuring out a deal together. And I often feel as though my job on those transactions is so much more important because I'm the person who can give structure to all these ideas that all kind of sound right. So for example, is it a pure percentage rent deal? Is it a pure sort of top line deal? Is there some sort of an earnout? And trying to successfully navigate the sort of needs and desires of two parties and put them into a restaurant deal is often so much more creative, so much more fun than any kind of a super arm's length M&A deal.
Right, because they have a concept. Like when they come to you, they have a concept.
100%.
We want to do this concept or this restaurant in this space. Make it happen.
Make it happen.
Like, just figure it out.
Yeah. And so the attorneys are often sort of part business counselor, part attorney, part therapist. But that's why I feel so privileged to be able to work with chefs because they have no appreciation for how these deals work. And so they come to us. And even the most sophisticated repeat player chefs don't really understand these deals. And these deals can be a lease. It can be an F&B management deal. So for, hotels don't often actually lease space to, say, Emerald. Emerald has an F&B management deal. He will be the face. He will be he will be actively managing and hiring key personnel, putting them in place, doing the overall aesthetic, doing the concept, maintaining the overall brand integrity. But he's not physically leasing that space. And so helping these clients understand how to structure their vision in any given space is, a truly creative process for me.
That sounds like fun.
Yeah, it is fun.
I like that. And I always think that chefs are good chefs. They're like artists. Some of them, they create something that, we just consume it. At the end, you have a feeling of fulfillment. There's not like, although I guess nowadays people are taking pictures of their food, but I don't quite understand that phenomenon, but I love to eat the food. So,
yeah.
That's cool. Well, I'm glad we did this, Scott. This was a lot of fun. Anytime you're here for a restaurant opening, you want to come back on the podcast, you're welcome as long as you invite Brett and I to dinner. That's, I'm just kidding about that part.
At least get us a table.
Yeah, exactly.
How's that sound?
Happy to always get you a table. Please come to Chicago.
Definitely.
And thank you guys so much for having me today. It was truly a huge pleasure being here.
Yeah. Thank you. A pleasure is ours. If you like this episode, please give us a 5-star review, share us, follow us, send us notes about what our amazing producer, Nelson Rosato. You'll find information about Scott in the show notes, and we'll see you next time.
Thanks, Scott. Nelson, be the man.
For more information on this show and other resources, visit fastamron.com and connect with us on LinkedIn, Facebook, and Instagram @FastAmron.